tank commander was the brain of the operation, responsible for the vehicle and its crew. He identified targets, gave firing orders and observed the results. His voice directed the battlefield, issuing commands via intercom to the driver and radio operator, while using speaking tubes and hand signals to communicate with the gunner and loader. Over the radio, he received orders from higher command and relayed critical battlefield updates. The gunner was the tank's deadliest asset. He fired the main gun and coaxial machine gun, tracking enemy movements while assisting the commander in battlefield observation. Precision and speed were his greatest weapons. The loader ensured the tank's firepower remained uninterrupted. He reloaded shells under the gunner's orders, maintained the turret's armaments, and was responsible for ammunition care. If the radio operator was lost in combat, the loader would take over his duties. The driver was the lifeline of the tank, maneuvering the heavy machine under the commander's guidance. He played a critical role in positioning the vehicle for combat, ensuring the best firing angles for the gunner while avoiding enemy threats. Beyond movement, he was also responsible for maintaining the tank's mechanical health and assisting in battlefield awareness. The radio operator was the unseen link between the tank and the larger battle. His job was to keep communications open, ensuring orders and reports flowed seamlessly. When not transmitting, his radio was always set to receive. He also operated the bow machine gun, and if the loader fell, he would assume his responsibilities. Tank warfare was as much a test of endurance as it was of skill. Crews battled through the suffocating heat of summer and the bone-chilling cold of winter. The steel interior of a tank was unforgiving, flesh and fabric stuck to frozen metal in the depths of winter, while the heat of summer turned the cabin into an oven. At night, panzers were positioned behind infantry outposts. One man stood watch from the turret while the others stole moments of rest. In the summer months, the best sleep came from lying beneath the hull, escaping the heat radiating from the armor. Over time, a strange bond formed between the men and their machines. A panther, a tiger, these were no longer lifeless war engines. They became living, breathing entities, an extension of the crew's own will. When battle came, hesitation meant death. Their only goal was to strike first, to destroy before being destroyed. The enemy was not just a machine, but the men inside it. Snipers were the greatest fear of tank commanders. Soviet marksmen were trained to target the exposed figure in the turret, forcing many to develop their own survival tactics. Otto Carius, one of Germany's top tank aces, had a method. He would periodically rise up, exposing his head and shoulders for just a few seconds, never staying still. Michael Wittmann, on the other hand, always insisted on having a scissors periscope mounted in his Tiger, a habit from his time in assault gun units where such tools were standard, but no tactic was foolproof. In the dense forests of Western Europe, countless commanders were struck down, particularly during the brutal autumn and winter fighting of 1944 to 45. Despite the terror of tank-on-tank battles, the greatest danger often came not from a column of enemy vehicles, but from a single, well-hidden anti-tank gun. Even Wittmann admitted that advancing T-34s caused him little concern. It was the lone, waiting Soviet gun that he feared most, a chilling premonition given his fate. When death came, it came in many forms. Some were quick, others horrific. In one instance, when Wendorf's Tiger I was destroyed, 2 survivors were trapped inside. Faced with the terror of burning alive, the 18-year-old loader made a fateful decision. He shot himself. The gunner, unable to reach his pistol, could do nothing but wait, expecting the inevitable. But fate had other plans. British soldiers climbed onto the ruined Tiger, and instead of finishing him off, they pulled him to safety, offering him something almost unthinkable in the chaos of war. So today we're diving into the brutal world of Germany's tank aces, men who turned the tide of battle from inside their steel beasts. Fighting through the frozen wastelands of the Eastern Front and the hedgerows of Normandy, these commanders faced impossible odds, outnumbered, outgunned, and always one shot away from destruction. In the chaos of war, their survival depended on instinct, precision, and the raw power of their machines. Felix Adamovich was born on November 20, 1919 in Salzburg, Austria, the son of a company manager. At the age of 19, he enlisted in the Wehrmacht in December 1938, a time when Europe stood on the precipice of war. His first posting was to Artillery Regiment 41 in Ulm, where he proved himself a capable soldier. Recognized for his abilities, he was promoted to lieutenant on April 1, 1940. But rather than staying in conventional artillery, Adamovich sought the heat of battle and volunteered for the elite Sturmartillerie. With Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's grand invasion of the Soviet Union, he found himself commanding his own Sturmgeschütz III in Sturmgeschützabteilung 185, fighting on the unforgiving Eastern Front. The brutal combat of the northern sector quickly tested his resolve. Facing entrenched Soviet positions and heavily fortified bunkers, Adamovich and his crew spearheaded attacks, smashing enemy defenses with precise firepower. On September 29, 1941, his actions earned him the Iron Cross Second Class EK2 after successfully destroying multiple bunkers and enemy tanks. By this point, he had become a seasoned officer accustomed to the chaos of mechanized warfare. The following year, his skill and leadership earned him a promotion to Oberleutnant on April 1, 1942, followed by a transfer to Sturmgeschützabteilung 904, which was being newly formed. His reputation as a formidable tank commander only grew as the war dragged on. On August 28, 1943, his contributions on the battlefield saw him awarded the Iron Cross First Class, a testament to his relentless effectiveness against Soviet armor. But it was in the nightmarish battles of 1944, when the Soviet steamroller was at full force, that Adamovich would make his greatest mark. By February 29, 1944, he was awarded the German Cross in Gold, DKG, for his continued battlefield successes, but the most intense test of his career was still ahead. Now a Hauptmann and in command of the 3rd Battery of Sturmgeschütz Brigade 904, he found himself in the hellish battles along the lower Narew in Poland, where Soviet armoured offensives struck with unrelenting ferocity. Between September 10th and 13th, 1944, his unit was thrown into a desperate defensive action, facing 6 Soviet attacks, each consisting of 20 to 30 tanks, supported by infantry and artillery barrages. Amid the chaos, Adamovich personally led his battery, maneuvering his Stug to key positions and picking off enemy armor one by one. In those brutal 4 days, he personally destroyed 20 Soviet tanks, while his subordinate vehicles accounted for another 37. For his unwavering courage and battlefield prowess, Adamovich was awarded the Knight's Cross, Ritterkreuz, on October 20, 1944. By war's end, he had been wounded 5 times, a testament to the intensity of his frontline service, and had accumulated an estimated 50 tank kills, a staggering number for any individual tanker. Unlike many of his comrades, Adamovich's military career did not end in 1945. In 1957, he joined the newly formed Bundeswehr, continuing his service in the post-war German military. He steadily rose through the ranks, ultimately retiring as an Oberst in 1979 after more than 4 decades in uniform. He lived a long life, passing away on February 10, 2013, leaving behind a legacy of courage, skill, and resilience. Ernst Alex was born on March 1, 1915, near the town of Schweidnitz, today Świdnica, Poland, possibly in the small hamlet of Seifersdorf, now known as Pogozawa. At just 20 years old, he joined the Wehrmacht in 1935, stepping into a rapidly militarizing Germany on the brink of global conflict. Assigned to Artillery Regiment 29 in Kassel, he quickly became a capable and disciplined soldier, honing his skills in the field of armored warfare. His first test came in September 1939 during the Polish campaign. where he proved himself under fire, earning the Iron Cross Second Class (EK2) on September 16th for his effectiveness in combat. As the war expanded, so did his role. By October 1st, 1940, he had been promoted to Oberwachtmeister, and with the launch of Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, he found himself on the cutting edge of the Wehrmacht's invasion of the Soviet Union. Now serving as a platoon leader in the 1st Battery of Sturmgeschützabteilung 243, his abilities as a tank hunter were put to the ultimate test. On June 26th, he played a decisive role in the fierce tank battle at Yavoriv, referred to in German reports under its Polish name Jaworów, where Soviet armor attempted to halt the German advance. Amidst the chaos of battle, Alex's precise gunnery and strategic positioning allowed him to destroy multiple enemy tanks. That night, during a Soviet counterattack between June 27th and 28th, he continued his onslaught, eliminating a total of 10 tanks. His actions shattered the enemy's defenses and cleared the way for the Wehrmacht's rapid push toward Lemberg, but his legend was only beginning. As the German advance pressed deeper into Soviet territory, Alex's tactical instincts led him into one of his most daring encounters. At the railway station of Kopachinchi, approximately 50 kilometers south of Ternopil, he came face to face with a Soviet armored train, a rare but formidable opponent. These heavily fortified trains were armed with powerful artillery and thick armor plating, capable of halting entire German divisions. Undeterred, Alex maneuvered his Sturmgeschütz into a forward position and, from dangerously close range, opened fire on the train. His shots smashed into the steel behemoth, crippling its 15-centimeter gun and neutralizing its threat. For this audacious act, he was awarded the Iron Cross First Class (EKI) on July 2nd, further cementing his status as an exceptional battlefield commander. However, his most defining moment came just weeks later. On July 27th, Alex found himself leading a desperate pursuit at the head of the elite 1st Mountain Division, 1st Gebergs Division. Their objective, to secure a crucial crossing over the southern Bug River near Bratslav before Soviet reinforcements could consolidate. Speed and aggression were the only options. With relentless Soviet resistance threatening to stall the advance, Alex pushed forward, spearheading the charge. Under intense fire, he pressed on, securing the vital crossing point. It was a feat of sheer determination and fearlessness, but it came at a cost. He was seriously wounded in the battle. However, his valor and skill in battle did not go unnoticed. On August 1st, 1941, he was awarded the Knight's Cross Ritterkreuz, having reached a personal total of 27 tank kills by that point. His frontline career, however, was cut short. Following his recovery, he was transferred to the reserve as an instructor, passing on his knowledge to new recruits. Despite his injuries, he remained a dedicated soldier, earning a promotion to lieutenant on June 1st, 1943. There are indications that he returned to combat in 1944, possibly fighting around Uman, where some of the bloodiest engagements of the Eastern Front took place. But as the war neared its grim conclusion, fate dealt him a cruel blow. In the final months of the conflict, he was critically wounded, suffering catastrophic injuries that led to the amputation of both his legs. Yet even in the face of such devastating loss, his service was recognized, and he was promoted to Oberleutnant on April 1st, 1945. After the war, his story faded into relative obscurity. Unlike many of his peers, he did not rise to prominence in post-war military or political circles. His life remained largely private, but his wartime deeds were undeniable, a testament to his resilience, skill, and extraordinary courage under fire. Ernst Alex passed away on October 25, 1965, leaving behind a legacy forged in some of the most brutal battles of the Second World War. Hinrich Klling was born on September 10, 1913 in Kassel, Germany. His military career began at an early age when, on August 1, 1932, he joined both the National Socialist German Workers' Party (NSDAP) and the Waffen SS, enlisting as an SS Anwärter. This was the start of a long and brutal journey through some of the most intense battles of World War II. Ambitious and determined, Klling attended the prestigious SS Junkerschule at Bad Tölz in 1938, where he trained in the art of warfare and leadership. Upon graduating, he was promoted to SS Untersturmführer on November 9, 1938, and assigned as a platoon leader in the 9th Company of SS Standarte Germania. His first true test of combat came during the invasion of Poland in 1939, but it was during the Battle of France in 1940 that he proved himself as a capable and fearless leader. Now serving in the SS Totenkopf Stug XII, he commanded the 3rd Company with skill and aggression, leading his men through the chaos of blitzkrieg warfare. His battlefield achievements did not go unnoticed. On August 20th, 1940, he was awarded the Iron Cross Second Class, EK2, and promoted to Obersturmführer. However, the war was far from over, and far greater challenges lay ahead. When Germany launched Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, Klling was once again at the forefront, now leading the 18th Company of the elite Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, LSSAH. His actions on the Eastern Front were relentless. By July 16th, he had already earned the Iron Cross First Class EKI for his successes against Soviet forces. By November, his effectiveness in battle saw him promoted to Hauptsturmführer. Yet, his time on the front was not without cost. Repeatedly wounded in combat, he was eventually pulled from the front lines in July 1942 to attend an advanced training course for Panzer Company commanders. This would mark the beginning of his transition into one of Germany's elite Tiger tank commanders. By late 1942, the LSSAH had been upgraded to a Panzer Grenadier Division, and Klling took command of its newly formed heavy company. It was here, during some of the most intense armoured battles of the war, that he cemented his reputation as a deadly tank commander. In March 1943, during the German counter-offensive at Kharkov, he led his Tigers into battle with his gunner, Wormbrunn, by his side. Their firepower proved devastating. Several Soviet tanks and anti-tank positions were obliterated, clearing the way for the German advance. Kling's most famous actions came during Operation Citadel, the massive German offensive aimed at crushing the Soviet forces at Kursk in July 1943. On the second day of the battle, he led his 3 operational Tigers in an assault on Hill 243.2, a heavily fortified Soviet position. The hill was bristling with anti-tank guns and entrenched defenders, but Kling's skillful command and the sheer firepower of the Tigers overwhelmed the defenders, securing the strategic high ground. Then, on July 8th, he led his mixed Panzergruppe deep into the rear of a heavily fortified Soviet line, where dug-in tanks and anti-tank guns stood ready to repel the German advance. Instead of a slow engagement, Klling struck with lightning speed. His Tigers unleashed devastation, breaking the enemy's defensive cohesion. Soviet units, caught off guard, fled in panic, leaving behind burning wrecks and abandoned fortifications. Just days later, on July 11th, west of Prokhorovka, the site of one of the largest tank battles in history, Klling was severely wounded and evacuated to Germany. It seemed like his days on the front were over, but he refused to stay away. By autumn 1943, he had recovered and resumed command, this time leading the reinforced 13th Company of LSSAH, now expanded to an astonishing 5 platoons, each equipped with 5 of the formidable Tiger tanks. The final months of 1943 saw Klling at the centre of some of the most ferocious armoured battles of the Eastern Front. On November 16th, he led a small Kampfgruppe in an assault on the village of Lysovka, facing an overwhelming Soviet defence. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Kling's Tigers tore through Soviet positions, destroying an estimated 80 heavy anti-tank guns and decimating the bulk of a Soviet battalion. Less than a week later, on November 22nd, his remaining operational Tigers spearheaded an assault on the fortified village of Yastrabenka. The Soviet defenders, relying on entrenched anti-tank strongpoints, were no match for the Tigers' firepower and tactical maneuvering. The village fell after a brutal fight, securing another victory for Klling and his men. His successes continued into December. On December 20th, during an attack on Chepovici Station, Klling personally destroyed his 46th enemy tank, a staggering number that placed him among the most effective tank commanders of the war. His relentless and aggressive tactics made him one of the most feared figures on the battlefield. For his outstanding achievements in armoured combat, he was awarded the German Cross in Gold, DKYG, on December 30th, 1943. Hinrich Kling's legacy remains one of daring leadership, calculated aggression, and battlefield dominance. From the frozen hellscapes of the Eastern Front to the fields of Kursk, his name was etched into the brutal history of World War II. His story is one of relentless pursuit, a career defined by both skill and destruction, a warrior who rode into battle atop one of the deadliest machines of war, leaving behind a path of fire and steel. By 1942, the Soviets had begun adapting, though not through large-scale battles alone, but by refining defensive doctrines and small unit coordination. One key development was the Sturmovie Gruppi, assault groups, which saw tanks operating in conjunction with sapper units and close support artillery. Soviet commanders learned that instead of using tanks as blunt instruments, they needed combined arms tactics, incorporating supporting infantry and engineering units to exploit breakthroughs. German commanders also made adjustments after suffering heavy losses against Soviet defensive lines, developing the Hedgehog Defense, Eigelstellung, where tanks and anti-tank guns formed fortified defensive pockets, creating layered zones that Soviet forces had difficulty penetrating. Battles in Zhev, 1942-43, demonstrated how the Germans effectively used this tactic, holding off numerically superior Soviet forces for extended periods. Throughout 1943, as Soviet industry ramped up tank production, they moved away from individual armoured units acting independently and instead developed self-sufficient mechanized corps. The emphasis was now on operational depth, deep battle maneuvers where waves of armoured formations, artillery barrages and air support worked in unison. Soviet tank riders desantniki became a common sight, with infantry riding directly on T-34s to immediately dismount and secure objectives, preventing German infantry counterattacks from regaining lost ground. In contrast, German tactics became increasingly defensive, relying on pack front, anti-tank gun nests, where multiple artillery pieces were positioned in overlapping fields of fire. This was evident in smaller, lesser-known engagements, such as the Battle of Velikie Luki, 1943, where German forces used concealed anti-tank positions to decimate Soviet armoured columns before retreating in an organised fashion. By 1944, Soviet armoured warfare had evolved into a highly coordinated, multi-layered offensive strategy. Rather than committing all their forces to a single breakthrough, they conducted maskirovka, military deception, to mislead German defenders about the true point of attack. This was a crucial factor in smaller yet decisive battles, like the Vitebsk-Orsha offensive, where Soviet forces used feints to stretch German defences thin before striking with overwhelming force. German armour, though technically superior in some respects, such as the Panther and Tiger tanks, was now handicapped by logistical failures, lack of fuel, and increasingly stretched defensive lines. The Soviets countered these threats with hit-and-run tactics, using mobile Su-85 and Su-100 self-propelled guns to hunt German tanks at long range. Additionally, the introduction of the T-34-85, with its superior 85mm gun, finally allowed Soviet tank crews to engage German heavy tanks on more equal terms. By the time 1944 came to a close, the transformation in armoured warfare on the Eastern Front was complete. What had started as a contest of speed and individual tank engagements in 1941 had become a war of attrition and large-scale coordinated maneuvers. Soviet doctrine had matured from chaotic counterattacks into precise multi-layered offensives that integrated infantry, artillery and armour into a single, unstoppable force. German reliance on elite, well-trained panzer divisions could no longer hold back the tide of mass-produced, well-coordinated Soviet armour. The Eastern Front had evolved from the age of isolated tank duels to the era of deep, methodical, and highly mechanized warfare. Kurt Knispel was born on September 20, 1921 in the small village of Salisfeld, now Salisov in modern-day Czechia. A Sudeten German, he grew up on a farm but had no intention of spending his life working the land. Seeking something greater, he left home at a young age and found work in a car factory in Niklasdorf, Mikulovice. But as war loomed over Europe, Knispel's path would lead him to something far more dangerous. In April 1940, at just 18 years old, he volunteered for the Wehrmacht. Initially trained as an infantryman, he quickly realized that his true calling lay in the Panzerwaffe. Transferring to Germany's elite armoured corps, he underwent rigorous training as a tank loader at Sagan and Putlos. By June 1941, just as Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, was launched, he was assigned to Panzer Regiment 29 of the 12th Panzer Division. His first experience in combat came aboard a short-barreled Panzer IV, where he initially served as a loader. However, fate would intervene. By late August 1941, while temporarily filling in as a gunner, he destroyed his first Soviet tank, an event that would mark the beginning of an extraordinary career as one of history's most lethal tank aces. In early 1942, Knispel's unit, 3rd Abteilung, was transferred to Panzer Regiment 4 of the 13th Panzer Division. He took part in the German drive toward the Caucasus, where he continued racking up tank kills, proving himself to be an exceptional gunner. By January 1943, he had already been credited with over a dozen confirmed tank victories, 7 near Leningrad and another 5 in the southern battles of Russia, now using the more powerful long-barreled 75mm cannon. His raw skill and instinct for tank warfare caught the attention of German High Command, and he was selected to join the newly formed elite heavy tank unit, Schwere Panzer Abteilung 503. Knispel's reputation as a tank killer soared. Now seated behind the sights of one of the most powerful tanks of the war, he fought in some of the most brutal battles of the Eastern Front. During the German retreat from the Lower Don, he and his crew played a key role in keeping the advancing Soviets at bay. Then, during Operation Citadel, the last great German offensive on the Eastern Front, he tore through Soviet armored formations with terrifying efficiency. In just 12 days of combat, he personally destroyed 27 enemy tanks. His battlefield legend only grew. At the Korsun-Cherkasy pocket, where thousands of encircled German troops fought for their survival, he held the line against overwhelming odds. He was there again in the savage fighting at the Kamenets-Podolsky pocket, another desperate German withdrawal, where his gunnery was instrumental in keeping the Red Army at bay. By October 1943, Knispel pulled off a nearly impossible feat, destroying a Soviet T-34 at an astounding range of 3,000 meters. It remains one of the longest recorded tank kills of the entire war. By April 25, 1944, the Wehrmacht officially acknowledged his deadly efficiency. He was mentioned by name in the Wehrmachtbericht, Germany's official military communique, after eliminating 101 tanks between July 1942 and March 1944. Despite his unparalleled skill, Knispel remained a simple Unteroffizier. Unlike many of his fellow aces who were awarded the prestigious Knight's Cross, he was overlooked due to his rebellious nature. Unlike most SS or Wehrmacht officers, Knispel wore his hair long, rarely shaved, and had little respect for military hierarchy. He openly challenged higher-ranking officers and refused to take credit for kills that weren't indisputably his, often allowing others to claim victories he rightfully earned. Because of this, it is widely believed that his actual kill count may have been closer to 195. On May 20, 1944, still a gunner and Unteroffizier, he was awarded the German Cross in Gold, DKIG, after destroying his 126th enemy tank. By September, his battalion was re-equipped with 45 brand new Tiger II tanks and was rushed to Hungary, where it was redesignated as Schwere Panzer Abteilung Feldherrenhalle. Now a Tiger II commander, Knispel continued his rampage across the battlefields of Hungary and Slovakia. By early 1945, his confirmed total had reached 168 tanks, an unprecedented number. However, the war was coming to a violent and chaotic end, and Knispel's luck would finally run out. On April 28, 1945, near Vostitz, modern-day Vlasatice, just 30 kilometers south of Brno, his Tiger II was hit during a battle against Soviet armor. Shrapnel tore into his head and abdomen, mortally wounding him. He was evacuated to a German field hospital in Urbau, now Verbovec, where he succumbed to his wounds 2 hours later. His incredible career had come to an end, just days before the Third Reich collapsed. Unlike many of Germany's most famous tank aces, Knispel remained largely unknown after the war. He was never part of the propaganda machine, nor was he celebrated in official Nazi literature. He was a soldier who fought hard but never cared for rank or prestige, a man who lived by his own rules in a rigidly disciplined military. Even his final resting place was lost for decades. His remains were only discovered in 2013, buried in an unmarked grave in a mass cemetery near Znojmo, Czech Republic. Today, Knispel stands as the highest scoring tank ace of all time, yet one of the least recognized. His legacy is not just that of a skilled warrior, but of a man who, despite being a soldier of Nazi Germany, refused blind obedience, cared little for personal glory, and was respected by his peers for his fairness and integrity. His battlefield achievements remain unparalleled, and his story, once buried with him, has finally been unearthed as a testament to the sheer brutality of armoured warfare in World War II. Ditto Diddens was born on April 22, 1917, in the quiet village of Bunderhamrich, nestled along the Ems estuary in northwestern Germany. The son of a farmer, Diddens grew up in a modest rural setting, but from a young age his path would diverge from the simplicity of country life. Already a non-commissioned officer in the Allgemeine SS before the war, he formally enlisted in the Wehrmacht in November 1938. He was initially assigned to the 2nd Battery of Artillery Regiment 58 and later transferred to Artillery Abteilung 422, where he began building a reputation for determination and discipline. On September 1st, 1940, Diddens was promoted to Lieutenant der Reserve, and just months later, as Hitler prepared to launch his invasion of the Soviet Union, he was appointed platoon leader in the 2nd Battery of Sturmgeschützabteilung 185. With the outbreak of Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, Diddens found himself thrust into some of the most violent combat of the early Eastern Front. His unit stormed through Soviet defences with brute firepower, and his leadership quickly stood out. For his actions, he was awarded the Iron Cross 2nd Class on August 19th, followed by the 1st Class just weeks later on October 2nd. But it was during the ferocious and often overlooked Battle of the Volkhof, amid the Red Army's attempts to break the siege of Leningrad, that Diddens truly made his mark. Between February 19th and March 11th, 1942, in the frozen deathscape near Pogostyi, roughly 70 kilometers southeast of the city, Diddens and his platoon faced wave after wave of Soviet armor. His Stug assault guns, dug in and holding a thin lifeline in the icy forests, stood their ground against superior numbers. Over those 3 brutal weeks, Diddens and his men annihilated 12 heavy tanks, 4 medium tanks, 4 anti-tank guns, 3 infantry guns, and even a heavily armored car. By that time, Diddens had personally accounted for 35 tank kills, with the total for his platoon climbing to an incredible 57 destroyed tanks in just 9 months of combat. For his valour, he was awarded the Knight's Cross on March 18, 1942, a high honour that marked him as one of the Wehrmacht's most effective assault gun commanders. Later that same year, in a surprising gesture of recognition, Heinrich Himmler personally awarded him the SS Ehrenring, a ring typically reserved for symbolic loyalty and honour within the SS. Though not SS himself at this stage, the gesture underscored how renowned Diddens had become even beyond the battlefield. Diddens' war was far from over. He was soon transferred to the elite Sturmgeschützabteilung Großdeutschland, one of the most prestigious and heavily engaged units in the German army. Promoted to Oberleutnant, he led the 1st Battery through the chaos of the Eastern Front's southern sector. In April 1944, his unit was engaged in fierce defensive and counter-offensive operations in Romania, particularly around the areas north of Targu Frumos. On April 25th, Großdeutschland launched a limited counterattack to seize control of the forested terrain between Barbatesti and Vaskani, as well as the strategic heights near Dumbravica. After the initial objectives were taken, Diddens noticed a heavily fortified Soviet pack front entrenched on a nearby hilltop. Without hesitation and acting purely on instinct and initiative, he led his Stugs directly into the line of fire. In a stunning display of aggression and precision, his battery obliterated 23 heavy anti-tank guns, but he wasn't finished. On the return route, he encountered an enemy battle group preparing for a renewed assault on the edge of the forest. Seizing the moment, Diddens' assault gun charged forward, destroying 3 more enemy tanks and 2 artillery pieces, while his battery eliminated several additional AT guns. His performance during these battles earned him personal recognition in the Wehrmachtbericht, the official military broadcast, on April 27th. Yet in a show of humility, Diddens insisted that the honour belonged not to him alone but to every man in his unit, and he requested all their names be included in the commendation. On May 23, 1944, Diddens again faced overwhelming odds. Working in coordination with the Panzer Aufklärungsabteilung, his Stugis advanced toward the village of Zahoma, 10 kilometers northeast of Piatra Neamț, to counter a massive Soviet offensive supported by fearsome Il-2 Sturmovik ground attack aircraft. Despite fierce enemy resistance, the Germans briefly retook the village before a renewed Soviet assault forced them back. During this brutal engagement, Diddens was gravely wounded by shrapnel and his right leg had to be amputated. While recovering in hospital, Diddens received word that he had been awarded the Oak Leaves to his Knight's Cross, Eichenlaub, on June 15, 1944, one of the Wehrmacht's highest honours. It was a final recognition of his exceptional courage, leadership and selflessness under fire. His war, however, was over. He spent the remainder of the conflict performing light duties in his hometown, far from the fire and fury of the Eastern Front where he had earned his fame. Ditto Diddens passed away on September 27, 1997, after a long post-war life. Though his story was never immortalized in the same breath as some of the more celebrated German tank commanders, his legacy remains one of fearless command, unshakable loyalty to his men, and remarkable battlefield achievements. He was a symbol of the deadly efficiency of the Sturmgeschützarm, and his actions helped shape the desperate and savage armoured war fought across the Eastern Front. Georg Dears was born on November 2, 1921, in the quiet municipality of Wiefelstede, around 50 kilometers northwest of Bremen. He was the son of a farmer, raised in the stillness of northern Germany, yet his life would become anything but quiet. In 1939, with war on the horizon, the young Dears volunteered for the Waffen SS. He was just 17. On April 1, 1940, he was assigned to SS Standarte Germania, and a few months later, he was transferred to the newly formed SS Regiment Nordland, a core element of the elite Wiking Division. Dears was thrown into the heart of the German push into the Soviet Union. In 1942, he fought in the Caucasus Mountains, operating the relatively small 3.7cm PaK-36 anti-tank gun, a weapon so outdated by then that its crews grimly called it the door knocker. Still, Dears and his comrades pushed onward through unforgiving terrain and relentless Soviet resistance. Near Grozny in late September 1942, his war came to a brutal halt when mortar fire severely wounded him. He was evacuated and spent months recovering. On June 1, 1943, he returned to service with a new rank, SS Unterscharführer, and a new assignment. He began intensive training with one of Germany's most fearsome weapons, the Tiger heavy tank. While others were still training or recovering, Dears was preparing for the war's most desperate phase. In the summer of 1944, as the Reich began to collapse around him, he found a brief moment of light. He got married. But soon, the Eastern Front came calling again. In late January 1945, Dears and his unit, Schwer SS Panzerabteilung 503, were sent to Pomerania, where they played a key role in retaking the town of Arnswalde, a rare German counter-offensive that temporarily pushed back the Red Army's advance. But this was just the beginning of what would become a nightmarish final chapter. By mid-April 1945, the Soviet juggernaut had reached Berlin. The final battle was at hand. On April 19th, Dears found himself in command of Tiger II No. 314, positioned on the hills northeast of Klosterdorf, about 3 kilometers east of Strausberg. The terrain was the last natural barrier before the Soviets reached the capital. Alongside another Tiger II, Dears held the line. Soviet tanks came rolling in by the dozen, but Dears and his gunner, Wolf-Dieter Koter, turned the hillside into a killing ground. 13 Soviet tanks were destroyed in a single engagement. Then, with one Tiger towing the other, the two vehicles pulled back into Berlin's outer defenses. As the city fell into chaos, Dears fought on. From April 26th, he joined the shattered remnants of the Nordland Division and the desperate foreign volunteers of Kampfgruppe Charlemagne in the Neukölln district. The fighting was now brutal and personal, house to house, street to street. On April 29th, he was awarded the Iron Cross First Class for his relentless defense. That same day, he moved his Tiger into the heart of the capital, Potsdamer Platz, where he destroyed several more Soviet tanks in running street battles. On April 30th, the day Adolf Hitler took his own life, Dears received radio orders to reposition near the Tiergarten, not far from the Reichstag. There, in the shadow of Berlin's ruined landmarks, he and his Tiger fought off overwhelming Soviet armor. According to post-war accounts, Dears and his crew destroyed an estimated 30 more Soviet tanks that day, mostly IS-2s and T-34s, in a last stand that blurred the line between courage and madness. In total, his Tiger was credited with 39 tank kills during the Battle of Berlin alone. Even as the city burned around him, Dears refused to surrender. On May 1st, with his lone remaining Tiger, he led a counterattack that temporarily recaptured the Kroll Opera House, just steps from the Reichstag itself. The moment was fleeting, but it showed the sheer defiance of those last few fighters. On May 2nd, with the war effectively lost, he attempted to break out to the west. When his Tiger was immobilized by a mine, he made the hard choice. He blew it up and fled the battlefield disguised as a civilian. His escape didn't last long. Near the Elbe, he was captured by Soviet forces and sent deep into the USSR, to a forced labor camp in the Moscow region. He endured years of captivity, surrounded by the bitter cold and the ruins of a lost war. Finally, in December 1949, more than 4 years after the guns fell silent, he was released and allowed to return to Germany. Georg Dears lived on for decades after the war, passing away at the age of 96. Though largely unknown outside of veteran circles, his actions in Berlin, particularly in those final, desperate days, have secured him a place among the most formidable Tiger commanders of the war. His Tiger II, reportedly seen in Arnswalde near the Marienkirche, became a symbol of a war machine in its final doomed stand. He was the son of a farmer who became one of the last defenders of a crumbling empire. His story is a window into the sheer desperation, destruction, and human cost of the final battle for Berlin. As we come to the end of this journey through the smoke and steel of the Eastern Front, we've explored the lives of some of the most lethal tank aces Germany ever produced, men like Ditto Diddens, Kurt Knispel, Hinrich Klling, Ernst Alex, and Felix Adamovich. Each one left behind a brutal legacy written in fire, twisted metal, and the shattered wrecks of enemy armor. These weren't just soldiers, they were predators in the unforgiving world of tank warfare, where a split-second decision meant the difference between life and death, between triumph and annihilation. Tank combat in World War II was not a game of clean lines and glory. It was vicious, close range, and terrifying. Crews fought in suffocating heat, with the smell of burning fuel and cordite filling their lungs, surrounded by the deafening roar of guns and the ever-present threat of enemy fire. Armor clashed at ranges where seconds decided everything. It wasn't just about skill, it was about nerve, instinct, and sheer will to survive. Yet even with all we've covered today, these are just a few names among many. For every Knispel or Klling, there were countless others. Obscure tank commanders who racked up dozens of kills but never made it into the history books. The brutal nature of the Eastern Front left little time for recognition. Some of the deadliest warriors of the war remain little more than fading photos and forgotten after-action reports. So if you enjoyed this dive into the world of tank aces and their savage battles, there's still much more to uncover. The war machines, the men who drove them, and the desperate grinding battles they fought. It's a world of history as intense and dramatic as any battlefield. And with that, we wrap up today's video. I'm incredibly grateful to have you here until the end. Your support truly means the world to me. A huge shout out to my amazing patrons. If you'd like to support the channel or get access to some exclusive content, the links to my Patreon and Instagram are down below. I hope you learned something new, and as always, I'll see you in the next adventure. Take care and goodbye for now.